Hello. My name is Jacob. Things were going south with my wife, Regina, but I kept hiding it. We'd been married for 9 years, and while we'd had our ups and downs, she'd always been my anchor. Lately, though, that anchor seemed to be pulling me into deep, murky waters. She'd started coming home from work later, claiming to be swamped with meetings. At first, it didn't bother me. She'd always been ambitious, but then she stopped being herself. Regina had started avoiding conversations. She used to ramble on about her day, her coworkers, the funny things that were happening at work. Now it felt like I had to wrench the words out of her mouth to get a full sentence. Even when she was physically present, her mind was elsewhere, always glued to her phone. I found myself wondering who she was texting, but I never got the courage to ask. Then came the moment that changed everything. One night, she was sitting on the couch when her phone vibrated. She laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard aimed at me in months. Her screen was tilted just enough for me to catch a glimpse. "Can't wait to meet you," the message read. My stomach churned. I kept my cool, pretending not to see, but the gears in my head were turning. Who sent that? What meeting? Was it a friend? I didn't contradict her then. Instead, I became more focused and began to notice other changes. She changed the password on her laptop, something she'd never cared about before. Her perfume lingered a little stronger when she came home late, and her excuses became more vague. Mason this, Mason that, she'd mention, laughing at how he'd always been the jokester in their department. I began to hate his name, even though I'd never met the guy. A few weeks later, a mutual friend blurted it out at a barbecue. "Oh, Regina and Mason? They always get coffee together after work." It was said innocently, but it hit me like bricks. My chest tightened, and I had to step away to catch my breath. I was spinning. My mind wanted answers, but my heart begged me not to look. What if I found something I couldn't unsee? That's when Marina came into the picture. Marina lives next door and went through a brutal divorce last year. She's sharp, witty, and doesn't sugarcoat anything. We'd exchanged pleasantries before, but I'd never really talked to her until now. One evening, I spotted her sitting on the porch with a glass of wine. I joined her, desperate for someone to talk to. I didn't spill the beans right away. Instead, I beat around the bush, told her I thought Regina and I were just going through a rough patch. Marina saw through me right away. "Are you going through a rough patch or avoiding the truth?" she asked bluntly. I had no answer. Over the next few weeks, I trusted her more. I told her about the late nights, the secretive behavior, the text message. She didn't mince words. "You can't bury your head in the sand, Jacob. If she's doing something, you need to know. But don't make accusations without evidence. Get the facts straight." Marina's words echoed in my head. If I was going to meet Regina, I needed to be sure. Marina and I began to formulate a plan. It was weird, like I was planning a robbery. We listed Regina's usual activities, the places she mentioned going, and even stalked Mason's Instagram. Sure, there were a few pictures of him and Regina at work events. Nothing inappropriate, but the sight of her smiling next to him touched me in a way I couldn't describe. I didn't want to involve Marina too much, but she became my rock. Our conversations grew longer, sometimes veering away from Regina and Mason to random topics. She told me about her ex, how she ignored the warning signs until it was too late. I told her about the early days of my marriage, how Regina and I would stay up all night dreaming about our future. I realized I was smiling more with Marina than I had in all the months I'd been with Regina. It scared me. One night, after Marina and I had spent a few hours going through Regina's calendar, I felt a strange change. We were sitting in her dimly lit kitchen, drinking coffee. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "You deserve to be happy, Jacob. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't name. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I found Regina's old laptop, which I'd forgotten about. She'd logged out of most of her accounts, but one email account was still accessible. I found hotel receipts, all recent, all matching her late nights. My blood ran cold. I wanted to run to Marina, but something stopped me. It wasn't her burden. I sat alone in the car that night, staring at the evidence. My thoughts kept returning to Marina's voice, her laugh, The way she never made me feel small for being vulnerable. When I finally confronted Regina, not with accusations, but with an innocent question, she froze. "How's Mason doing?" I asked casually. Her face was pale, and she couldn't find the words. "He's okay, I think." "Why?" The way she avoided my gaze told me more than words could. That evening, I found myself back at Marina's. She didn't ask what was wrong. She simply handed me a glass of wine and let me sit in silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I was at a crossroads. Regina hadn't admitted anything, but my intuition told me that the truth was staring me in the face, and I needed to uncover it myself. But one day everything changed so that I didn't even have to look for the answers myself. I hadn't planned on going to that restaurant that day. Frankly, the idea of stepping out of my dirty reality seemed as foreign as trying to put on someone else's clothes. Marina insisted. "You need a break, Jacob. Let's just eat something decent and forget about all this heaviness," she said, her eyes full of determination that I couldn't argue with. This wasn't a date. I told myself that a dozen times on the way there, but deep down I knew it was dangerously close. The place wasn't fancy, but it had a warm atmosphere that could almost make you think life wasn't that hard, and my wife and I like to come here sometimes. Soft lighting, the clinking of glasses, and hushed conversation filled the space. Marina looked effortlessly stunning in a navy dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. I caught myself looking at her and quickly looked away, fiddling with the menu. "Let's just enjoy this, okay?" Marina said, her voice quieter. She reached across the table and ran her fingers over mine. It was brief, but electrifying. "You deserve it." For a moment, I believed her, but that fragile calm shattered like glass when I saw them. Regina and Mason were sitting in the corner, half hidden by a large potted plant. At first, I thought it was just some cruel trick of the universe. Of course they'd choose the same night, the same restaurant. But then I noticed their body language. Mason leaned closer, whispering something that made Regina laugh in a way I hadn't seen her do in months. She touched his hand, and he placed his hand on her thigh. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The fork in my hand hovered in midair, and my breathing became shallow. Marina followed my gaze, frowning when she saw what I was looking at. "Is that?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping the floor. "I need—" Marina grabbed my wrist, stopping me. "Jacob, wait," she said, her voice urgent. "Think about it." But I wasn't thinking. My mind was a storm of rage, betrayal, and a desperate need for answers. I took a step toward their table, my fists clenched, ready to confront Regina, to demand that she explain how she could sit so comfortably with him while our marriage was falling apart. Before I could take another step, Marina took action. She grabbed my hand, spun me around, and kissed me. It wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was bold, rough, and utterly shocking. For a moment, the world around me disappeared. All I could feel was her warmth, her lips on mine. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a lifeline, keeping me from causing a scene that would ruin everything. When we pulled away, I was stunned, breathless. "What the was that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "To stop you from doing something stupid," Marina replied, her eyes searching mine. "Jacob, this is not the place or the time." Before I could respond, I heard Regina's voice. "Incredible!" she shouted, loud enough to turn heads across the restaurant. My heart sank when I turned to see her standing there, fury radiating off her like heat. Mason looked just as confused, looking from Regina to me as if he'd just found himself in the middle of a soap opera. Regina burst in, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. "Are you kidding, Jacob?" she hissed, her voice shaking with anger. "You're here with her while you're doing what, Regina?" I snapped, my voice louder than I'd intended. "Having dinner with a coworker? Or is Mason more than that?" Her face flushed, and the room fell into a tense silence as every customer watched our argument unfold. "You have no right," she began, but I cut her off. "No right?" I said, raising my voice. "I'm your husband, Regina. Or did you forget that while you were busy hiding with him?" Regina glanced around, realizing how many people were watching. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said through clenched teeth. "No, you're embarrassing yourself," I snapped. "Do you even care how it looks?" Before she could respond, someone in the crowd pulled out their phone and the light started flashing. It was like a silly dream. Regina tried to protest, but her words came out garbled and defensive, making her look worse. Mason mumbled something about not knowing she was married and slipped out the door, leaving her standing there alone. It all felt surreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. By the time the restaurant staff ushered us out, the damage was done. Regina's face, red with anger and humiliation, was all over social media the next morning. The video had gone viral, with captions like "Bistro Scandal" and "Cheating Wife Gets What She Deserves." For the first time, Regina wasn't in control of the narrative. Her friends stopped answering her calls, and Mason ignored her completely. Turns out he wasn't the type to stick around when things got tough. In the days that followed, Regina tried to make things right with me. She showed up at the house, makeup-free and teary-eyed, begging for forgiveness. "Jacob, please," she said, squeezing my hands. "I made a mistake, but we can fix it. We can go to therapy, start over." I pulled my hands away, shaking my head. "There's nothing left to fix, Regina," I said evenly. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed our marriage." The divorce papers were filed the following week. As for Marina, things were more complicated. I couldn't look at her the same way after that kiss. It wasn't that I didn't care about her. I did, more than I cared about her, but everything felt too raw, too confusing. I avoided her calls. Our conversations were short when we bumped into each other. She didn't push, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I spent many nights alone, trying to figure it all out. The only clarity I had was the realization that I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who wasn't Marina. Someone who wasn't caught up in the tangled mess of my life. That's when I thought of Alex. Alex and I had been friends for years. He was the guy who could keep his cool in any situation. A steady presence in a world that often felt too chaotic. The last time we'd seen each other was at a barbecue Regina and I had thrown a few months ago, when everything had felt normal. He was the only one I could trust to listen to me without judgment, so I called him. "Hey, man," I said, my voice tight. "Got time to chat?" "Always," he answered without hesitation. "Come over tonight. I'll fire up the grill." I stopped at the store on the way to his house, grabbing a case of beer and some steaks. Alex was already in the backyard when I arrived, the smell of charcoal and spices in the air. His decor was simple but comforting. An old grill, a mismatched patio set, and a string of lights that gave the space a warm glow. "Jacob," he greeted me, clapping his hand on my shoulder. "It's good to see you, but you look terrible." I managed a weak laugh. "It's obvious, right?" We opened a couple of beers, and I let the conversation flow. We talked about work and sports and stuff until the steaks were sizzling on the grill. But as the evening wore on and the beer flowed, the dam burst. I told him everything: the restaurant, the fight, the viral video, and the end of my marriage. Alex listened attentively, nodding occasionally but letting me get it all out. When I finally stopped talking, he leaned back in his chair and took a sip of his beer. "Dude, this is a really tough situation," he said. "But you're doing the right thing breaking up with Regina. She made her bed, literally, and she's lying in it." I nodded, grateful for his approval. But I had one more thing to say. "There's one more part to this," I began hesitantly. "Marina." Alex raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Marina? The neighbor? Huh? What about her?" I told him about how Marina had been there for me, how she'd helped me piece things together when I couldn't think straight. I even told him about the kiss in the restaurant and how it had completely thrown me off balance. "I've been avoiding her ever since," I admitted. "I just don't know what to do." Alex shook his head. "You're overthinking this, Jacob. Look, Marina stepped in when you needed someone. She shouldn't have, but she did. You don't have to push her away just because you're afraid of what it might mean. If anything, you should thank her." I stared at the ground, his words sinking in. "You're overthinking?" "I know," Alex said firmly. "Just don't make it too complicated in your head. Be honest with her. If you need space, say it." If you want to see where this goes, say it too. But don't dump her. She doesn't deserve that. By the time the night was over, I felt better. Alex had a way of simplifying things, cutting through the noise in my head. As I drove home, I decided to stop running from Marina. She was there for me when everything else was falling apart, and I owed her the same honesty. Over the next few weeks, I slowly reconnected with Marina. At first, it was casual, dropping by to bring her coffee, helping her fix a squeaky door hinge, or just sitting on the porch and talking about anything but Regina. She didn't push me to talk about the divorce, and I appreciated that more than I could ever say. One evening, I invited her over. It was the first time anyone had been over since Regina left, and the house felt different, emptier, but also freer. Marina brought a bottle of wine, and we sat on the couch for hours, laughing at silly movies and reminiscing about the little things that made life bearable. As the weeks turned into months, our conversations deepened. Marina opened up more about her own struggles, the divorce, the loneliness that followed, and how she was rebuilding her life piece by piece. Her resilience inspired me, made me feel like maybe I could rebuild, too. Being with Marina felt easy, like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside her window. Marina was still asleep next to me, her hair disheveled, her face peaceful. I lay there for a while, taking it all in. For the first time in months, I felt good. Not fixed, not healed, but good. And that was enough. When I left her house later that day, I realized Alex had been right. I shouldn't have pushed Marina away. She wasn't just helping me heal, she was helping me find myself again. And for that, I was grateful. Goodbye.